My name is Nikki Brugnoli. I'm a Virginia-based artist and curator, and I teach studio art at Flint Hill School in Oakton, Virginia. I want to thank Leslie Monami for inviting me to be a guest juror for Those Spaces Between Us. It has been an honor and a privilege to review so many extraordinary works of art created around the country. There was an enormous variety, breadth, and width to the submissions. When asked to jury this exhibition, my immediate thoughts were directed to the current COVID-19 moment we have all been living through as a collective human society since the early months of 2020. At once, the title for this exhibition called me towards quiet or contemplative work, towards the unknown and the mysterious. Those spaces or pauses between us are sacred, timeless and fleeting all at once, and my intention was to create an exhibition of works that embodied those ideas. Those Spaces Between Us aims to examine real, mental, and metaphorical spaces we inhabit. The title is implicit to understanding and acknowledging the tender, experiential, familial, imaginative, ritualistic, and resilient exchanges we make as human beings. While the selections are really around a human experience, interaction, or engagement, the vast majority of the work in this exhibition embodies a sense of absence and longing. As a juror, I was drawn to that tension and worked deliberately to pull together very different kinds of works that nod to similarities we have encountered over and over again this past year. Poetry and narrative, language, is also an important component of the experience of those spaces between us. Whether spoken, written, implied, or felt, words rise to the surface of this exhibition over and over again. Those Spaces Between Us asks the viewer to reimagine and reflect on what the pandemic has left in its wake, how we've been changed by it, and what lies ahead. The artists in Those Spaces Between Us closely examined space, boundaries, borders, memories, longings, imagination, reality, and transformation. In Shaped Number 9, Dustyn Bork aims to strip architecture from its three-dimensional surroundings, where there is a tension between physical space and its illusionary depth. Bork creates a liminal space between the constructed environment and our spatial response to how we imagine occupying it. In Gold Drag, Malina Busch explores interdependent but fluctuating relationships. This piece is the result of an improvisational process where there is a call and a response between the artist and the materials that she has chosen, and the spaces in which these moments existed. Through a negotiation of physical boundaries and limits of the body and materials, Busch aims to explore what Merleau-Ponty refers to as the overlap between the seeing and the seen, the touching and the touched. This is a space and time which might be glimpsed but can never be fully grasped. With each piece, Busch worked until the point of balance was reached between herself, the form, and the space in which they exist. In her body of work involving red bricks, Untitled, Where Two Things Meet, acts as a form of protest against the distinction from inside and outside, in a way to challenge notions of self and other. Bonnie Carrow uses the bricks to reference the perimeter of the home, the point of distinction between interior life and exterior world. By dovetailing the two bricks together, Carrow presents an unusual object relationship that suggests both bodily and social interactions. By repurposing a symbol of separation, this material gesture proposes new forms of connection. The artist's book, Mountain Gravel Books, is included in a series of books Lisa Cowell made using a Xerox scanner to break apart and morph words and images into abstract compositions and allegoric poetry. Inspired by a famous collaboration between Sigmar Polk and Gerhard Richter entitled Transforming a Mountain into a Ball of Light, her series explores transitions from understood images and texts into ambiguous space. from solid ground to small pieces. Through the comparisons forged between foundations of understanding in text and book forms and foundations of solid meaning, this series asks viewers to accept a space in which narrative is nonlinear and enigmatic. In the photograph post-op, which was taken 2 days after surgery to remove the kidney and the tumor that invaded it, Laura Beth Davidson's 4-year-old daughter walked the halls of the Children's Hospital for some exercise and change of scenery. Her husband walked with her daughter, holding the cord of her pulse oximeter. Davidson trailed behind to document everything: the koala hospital gown, the rumpled hair, and the big wide world outside to which they couldn't wait to return. As a juror, I was drawn to both the intimacy and tenderness of the figures within this photograph. In this last COVID year, we have been witness to interiors of hospital spaces through camera lenses and personal experiences, captured perfectly as a quiet dialogue of fear and longing. Touching photographically is a perfect embodiment of our isolation. We've spent the better part of a year seeing one another through a lens, separated by time and space. The holding of this photograph behind the one being photographed is a double whammy of longing. Longing to touch, to hold, to hug, to be loved, and to love. There is an intimate distance in this image that truly captures the essence of those spaces between us for me. Made in the time of quarantine, social isolation, and the pandemic, dating you and me in a pandemic isolates gestures that many of us are familiar with in a search for connection to others. Shannon Finnell asks the viewer, how do we connect with others when confined to our spaces? In the work A Kind of Palimpsest 6, Kate Fitzpatrick creates repetitive glyphs that appear as broken language that gather and float away to reveal new worlds. This work is part of a larger series of layered drawings on transparent papers inspired by palimpsests. Palimpsests stand in for the day-to-day veneer that covers the meaning of words and images we encounter. The overwriting of the artist's signs systems opens up the possibility for multiple meanings to live in the remnants of our readable surfaces. The meaning of images and words lies somewhere in the interplay of spaces between. In Untitled Embrace, Emily Fussner is interested in how the shadows extend the visual space and form, creating another form of liminality. Using paper pulp, Emily Fussner cast cracks in a parking lot. She left the paper pulp to dry, sometimes for several days, and intentionally let cars drive over it, the pressure condensing and strengthening the form. One hope Fussner has during the process is for perhaps a pedestrian to notice the cast and consider that transitional space differently. Later, Fussner returned to the site and removed the casting because of her interest in recontextualizing or bringing a record of an overlooked and transient space into a different area. This allows new possibilities to emerge in the encounter. Once removed, the paper keeps the shape of the fracture, a scar that can cast a shadow, a map of specific cracks with dirt and pine needles still clinging to the fiber, a microscopic diagram of plant cells, the organic form of a body, the heart, and embrace. In this portrait titled Vayet, and in his response to COVID-19, Zachary Handler began a portrait series entitled Errands. Art had always been the only way he knew how to take care of himself and of others. Errands became a way for him to connect with intention, to show mutual respect and care for others, and to create a gift exchange at a time when no one could be together. Handler started Errands on April 18, 2020, and consists of over 240 unique portraits of people from across the globe. It documents the shared shelter-in-place experiences. His process was to call people, strangers or friends, on video. They would have a little wellness check to be sure someone had asked them, "How are you today?" Then he would set up his phone somewhere in his house and take their portrait. In Handler's works, in his own words, "It's simple and strange, exciting and creative as that." In the 9th of September 2020 in San Francisco, Mary Janacek explores colors and gradations in a series of works that are rooted in images of clouds seen in 2020. They converge natural and unnatural disasters of the pandemic, social injustice, and climate change that gave way to a landscape of smoke-filled skies. Despite the space between, similar clouds emerged from different locations and moments in time. The work aims to create an intimate visual space for reflection and contemplation on grief, unrest, and transformation. It asks the question, what rises from the ruin? In the space between Nilu Kazem Zadeh includes 2 family photographs. One image is of 2 of her relatives in their orchards in Hassanabad, Iran, and the other image is of her childhood self playing outside in Ashton, Maryland. The black and white edit almost makes this reel of moments seem as though they exist in the same space and time. In the video Sandcastles, Cecilia Kim contemplates how language fails as a communication tool. The text, narrated in Korean by the artist's mother, communicates emotional overtures, while the verse, I am exasperated by my own silence, illustrates the struggle of speaking, both in a foreign language and within a native tongue. Words are caught in the air, lost in the space between 2 people.
천근의 무게로 내장을 짓누른다. 내장들은 곱는다. 언어는 늘 그런 식이다.
In the city, you forget to look at the sky. Sharon Koblinger presents photographs that are only visible by way of a mirror. The viewer's own reflection becomes intertwined with the artwork, and they are urged to confront their perceptual limitations. Photographs are presented in sculptural frames to emulate the experience of peripheral vision. The black and white image is mounted to the side of the steel frame facing the wall, while a mirror reflects the photographs towards the viewer. The steel frame obscures a straightforward viewing angle, so viewers must peek around the sides of the sculptural frame to catch glimpses of the reflected photography imagery. The frames are installed with ample physical space in between to enable viewers to press their bodies against the wall, crouch below to look up, and take multiple angles to view the image shift as their body moves in space. In Anya Kotler's painting, The Conversation, the viewer encounters a compressed space that Kotler created during the pandemic. There is a tabletop around which the spiral of a conversation takes place. Sometimes, these are the hands of family members who are spending much time together in close quarters. The space between the family has collapsed, and each brings his or her own wounds onto this small rectangle. At other times, the hands are of one individual, her thoughts going in circles within the restraints and constraints of the mind. Jacob Leha's Exit is part of a recent series of drawings in Leha's Richmond, Virginia studio, and is composed or created by drawing the architectural skeleton, as well as laser lights of queer nightclubs around the city of Richmond from memory. Leha is interested in the relationship between nightlife and queer culture, and how many queer people use these spaces as a secondary home. Through the process of screen printing, which he has described as drawing, Leha is actively exploring ideas of home and space and belonging, as seen through a very specific lens of identity. Over the course of 2020, Harry Mayer has primarily occupied a single space, his small apartment. Each day, he would wake up in the same space and spend all of his time between his bedroom, kitchen, and bathroom. Mayer described it as, "It's confusing. I feel like I'm not supposed to be here, and at the same time, it's the only place I can be. It's the only place I feel safe." My Me Box was created as a way of being able to see himself in the space that he occupies. His aim was to understand the space he takes up, to better understand the size of himself, and how he exists in space. My me box was built to Mayer's own height and shoulder width. In his own words, it's a crazy realization standing next to an object that is built to your own dimensions. You truly don't understand how big you are until you're standing next to yourself. C.C. Cole McInturf's Languages Not Yet Spoken was inspired by a sable palm husk that crashed 40 feet treetop to ground in front of her in Southern California in 2019. Badly disfigured in this otherwise normal shedding, it was evocative and beauty-filled in death. She shipped it home and lovingly weaved it back into recognizable form during the pandemic in 2020. The husks stitched knots, and every space between them were like metaphors for the pandemic-forced distancing McInturf was living through. In the beginning, stitches were like emergency triage, furtive and spaced randomly just to stabilize the rapidly drying husk. As with public attitudes in those early months of social distancing, McInturf didn't fully comprehend all that was to come, but she kept sewing. Later, patterns of spacing emerged and were re-sewn with a deeper, more deliberate awareness and came to pose a question. In her own words, putting things back together after injury, disfigurement, failure, misunderstanding, can we find value, forgiveness, or beauty in the changed state or situation? Can those spaces become healing? In Ruby Andromeda Miller's Measure Mark, space is examined by defining it in different ways. The words of a poem shape the whiteness of a page. The stones of a cathedral enclose a verticalness no one looked into without the stones pointing upwards. These tools, taken from a tool of measurement and made into an ambiguous pair of making tools, offers the viewer options to explore defining a space for themselves. They wait in that potential moment when the space is still undefined. Measure Mark is made of the pieces of a square ruler with a scribe, but leaves all of the dimensional information behind and adds a feather and other materials. The components of the tool itself that did the measuring are gone, and the shop has been left behind. They are both on display and seem to be offered and for handling, even though their use is totally unclear. In her Recession from Homesickness series, Whitney Sage has created a series of monochromatic ink paintings on paper that addresses universal issues of loss as related to our relationship with home and the individual and collective stories lost in the life cycles of urban degradation. Through the evocation of the image of the home and tintype photographs, Sage's paintings play on issues of psychological loss as related to memory and leaving home, and the nostalgic longing that our separation with our primal home and the objects within it creates. Joabi Silva's Synchronism No. 4 is the result of a collaboration with American Hannah Bevins from Maine and Havan al-Sindi from Germany. The works explore ideas of synchronism through their lenses and through visual language. This work is a collaboration with national and international artists whose aim is to open dialogue about connectivity through direct and indirect synchronism, activity, and practice. The questions in play are, how are we connected? Through what things we are and are not connected? And what do ideas of synchronism have to do with a 21st century art practice? Susanna Starr tells us chiffon noir is about the marriage threshold, as symbolized by the bridal handkerchief. Used as keepsakes and to catch happy tears, these handkerchiefs are the embodiment of transition, delicately reflecting the crossing of life's boundaries. Chiffon noir has been made using the process of frottage, which absorbs a visual image of a handkerchief or lace doily from pure physical form. Like photography or film, the rubbings develop over time as the recording is revealed. But it is not solely the surface texture that is recorded. The resulting image is startling and unforeseeable, a transformation from a physical to a visual realm. It suggests a fluid state of time, the indefinable space between the present and the past, and an enigmatic place between the physical and the felt. Combining aspects of drawing, printmaking, and sculpture, the final piece is a new entity that is both tangible and vaporous. In Citizens National's Third Country, Katie Waugh invokes the sometimes violent, sometimes routine experiences of physically encountering a border. Under or adjacent to nearly all of the bridges spanning the northern border of the U.S., Waugh attempts a mutual connection between her hand and the membrane of water that separates the countries. For Waugh, it is an attempt to assert human presence in liminal space. For her, these waters are distinct and undeniable geologic boundaries, yet between their shores and the human ability to perceive this political border is challenged, while the fluid borderline itself is policed by an ever-intensifying surveillance apparatus. Alyssa Yamaguchi-Juarez's Maybe I Am is a digital collage that examines the spaces we exist in and the spaces we have inhabited. There are ambiguous and disjointed spaces that are familiar and fantastic when placed together, the edges and fractures showing. The figure restrains from interacting with space and shows the isolation that we have had to maintain in 2020. Yamaguchi-Juarez asks the viewer, am I taking too much space? Too little? If I am outside, is that okay? There is a complexity and mystery in this constructed image that beckons and relates to ideas of spaces between us. As an artist contemplating challenging moments and places in my own work, I feel a deep and profound connection to those spaces between us. There were 168 applicants to this exhibition, and I was able to select 23 works. It was an honor to review so many incredible artworks by extraordinary artists from across the country with global perspectives and narratives. Thank you to all the artists. You inspire. And thank you to the Target Gallery and Leslie Monami for inviting me to participate in this memorable experience, marking a moment during the global pandemic that has shaped the lives of so many of us.